So today I want to talk about the importance of stories. Stories are something that inspires, instructs, informs. Stories are also how culture is sustained, how culture is created. And stories happen whether we like them to happen or not. Stories are simply part of the fabric of how every organization operates. Each person, after they leave orientation or induction, walks onto the job, and the very first thing that somebody says to them is, well, let me tell you how it really happens here. And they do that with a story. Stories are what are shared after work and say, this is how things happen here. This is what the culture is. So we want to be intentional with stories because we want to use stories to help sustain the pieces of culture, the parts of the organization that we want, and also ways to lead change. And change is led by stories. So we need to think about how do we help people structure stories that support the values that we're looking for, that support the culture that we're looking for, that help people learn how to be the change that we're talking about. So the very first thing we need to do is say what kind of structure should be present in a story and how long a story are we talking about. And we need to recognize that some people are very gifted at telling stories, and some people need some support to become skilled in telling stories. So the structure that we're teaching is that you start with an introduction. You start with what people like and admire about the person. You don't start with the issue that's causing you to tell the story. You start with, what do we like about this person? What do we admire? Why we'd like to have this person in our lives? That this person who is someone who draws people to them, is somebody who's dedicated, who knows how to get what they want. What are the attributes of the person that we want to share? And that should be the front end of the story. And once we've introduced the person, then it's time to introduce the issue. Why are you telling the story? What is it that the story illustrates? What is the challenge that was faced? And if you've been listening to Julie's story about Darlene, you've heard a story about somebody who draws people to her, somebody for whom her faith is important, somebody who says, what is most important to me is other people, how they feel, what's happening with them. But Julie was also somebody who was falling asleep, who was having trouble getting out of bed. And so the issue that's introduced is introduced first in the typical way we think about it. Darlene is somebody who is non-compliant, who isn't following the direction that we would like her to follow. And then how did we deal with that issue? How did we look at it? What tools did we use? How did we analyze it? And what conclusion did we come to? And the conclusion that people came to about Darlene was that she had no reason to get up. She had no reason to attend to tasks that she found boring, uninteresting. But if she found things that had to do with people, that had to do with their welfare, their well-being, if there was a way for her to bring joy into people's lives, there was also purpose and meaning in her life. And telling that then gives people a whole different way of looking not only at Darlene, but looking at how do we structure services, how do we structure the supports for people, and how do we begin to move forward. So the story ends with the outcome. Once you have the story, then you have to decide how are we going to share it? How are we going to make sure that other people hear it? What's the best format? What's the best way? And the way we're doing this is frequently the best way, video. Challenging for the people who are telling the story, but best for the listener, best for the viewer. Finally, though, we have to say stories also instruct not only the people who are listening to them from the perspective of people doing direct support and what we would like them to know, but stories also can instruct managers. Stories can inform managers about what is important to the organization. What's the culture of the organization? How are services organized? Does it make sense? And some simple questions will often help. So if you just think about the story about Darlene, one of the first questions to ask is this exceptional or is this typical? Are there more people like Darlene who are bored in the day service, who don't have anything to look forward to and are therefore difficult to get out of bed? Is something going on in the day service that says the way we look at people, the way we think about people, is do they conform, or are we thinking about what is important to each person? How can we achieve that? How can we make that happen? So when we help managers analyze the stories, when we help managers take a look at what's behind that story, stories of success will still inform. But we need to also have people become comfortable in sharing stories of struggle. So it's not just stories of success that we want to have shared within the organization, but it's also stories of struggle. So that people feel comfortable saying, here's what I'm trying to do. Here's what I'd like to achieve. And I'm not being entirely successful. And being able to look at that and be able to say, well, what does that tell us about skills? Do people have the skills that they need? Are there more tools that we need to introduce? Do the tools need to be more widespread in their use? What are we learning about the organizational culture? Are there things around the culture that are standing in the way? Do we have strong blame culture here instead of having an opportunity for people to be able to share what's not working as well as what's working and learn from it? Are there policy or practices, or is there structure? Is there no alternative for where people spend their day? Being able to think about that, look at that, and then take actions on it is another function that stories can serve. And that's it.